দাসে করুণা করি। ওহে বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর দয়ার সাগর হে দাসে করুণা করি। দিয়া পাদ ছায়া সদ হে আমার তোমার চরণ ধরি। সদ হে আমার তোমার চরণ ধরি। ছায়া বেগদমি ছায় দোষ শোধি ছায় গুণা দেহ দাসে। ছায়া সৎসঙ্গা দেহ হে আমারে বসেছি সঙ্গে রাশে। একাকী আমার নাহি পাইব হরিনাম সংকীর্তনে। তুমি কৃপা করি সদা বিন্দু দিয়া দেহ কৃষ্ণ নাম ধনে। কৃষ্ণ সে তোমার কৃষ্ণ দিতে পারো তোমার শক্তি আছে। আমি তো কাঙ্গাল কৃষ্ণ কৃষ্ণ বলে ধাই তব পাছে পাছে। ধাই তব পাছে পাছে। ওহে বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর প্যার সাগর হে দাসে করুণা করি। জয় বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর জয় বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর। उज्ज्वलवरनां गौरवरदेहं विलसिता निरवधि भावविदेहम्। त्रिभुवन पावन कृपायलेशं तं प्रणमामि च श्री सच्चिदानन्दम्। Namami Cha Shri Sachitanayam Vigalita Nayana Kamala Jaladharam Bhushana Navarasa Bhava Vikaram Vibhavarishishaloka pravisha nidrachari utajiva Bolo Hari Hari Mukunda Murari Rama Krishna Haya Kriva Jaya Dasharati Rama Yashoda Dudala Govinda Gopala Vrindavana Purandara Gopi Priya Jana Radhiya Ramana Bhuvana Sundara Bara Ramananta Kara Makhana Taskara Gopi Jana Vastrahari Rajira Rakhala Gopa Vindapala Chitta Hari Bhakti Hari Yogendra Bandana Shri Nanda Nandana Braja Jana Bhayahari Navina Nirada Rupa Manohara Mohana Vamshi Bihari Jashoda Nandana Kamsa Nishudana Nikunjara Savilasi Kadamba Kanana Rasa Parayana Vrindavijina Nivasi Ananda Vardhana Premani Ketana Ulasa Jagagama Gopangana Gana Chitta Vinodana Samasta Gunagana Dhama Jamuna Jivana Kili Parayana Manasa Chandra Chakora Nama Sudhara Jagao Krishna Dasa Rato Vachana Manamo Jaya Krishna Balaram Krishna Balaram Krishna Balaram Jaya Krishna Balaram Pralaya Payodi Jalidritavana Sivedam Dihita Vahita Charitramakedam Keshavadita Vina Sharira Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Shantiriha Vipula Tare Tishtati Tava Prishte Dharani Dharana Kina Chakra Garishe Keshavadeta Guna Sharira Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Dasati Dasana Shihare Dharani Kavaragna Shashini Kalanka Kaleva Nimagna Keshavadeta Shukara Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Avakara Kamala Varena Kamadutta Shringam Dalita Hiranya Kashipurtanubhingam Keshavadeta Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Chalayasi Vikramane Balimadbhuta Vamana Padanaka Nirajanita Jana Pavana Keshavadeta Vamana Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha
Hare Krishna. So today we'll be speaking from the Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 35. And before that, I'll just sing Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. So she'll be reading from Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 35. So this canto is a summary study of the Bhagavatam. This is the beginning of the conversation between Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev Goswami. And the first chapter is all about the first step in God realization, which is understanding that the Lord is the creator. And then the second step is to understand the Paramatma, or realize the supersoul within our heart. And so this is a verse from that chapter that talks about a natural process where we can realize this on our own. Could you go to the verse, please? Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu lakshita swatmanahari drishyer buddhyadibir drashta lakshaner anumapakai. Someone like to read? Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu
Lakshita satmanahari
lakshita swatmanahari
Drishye buddhyadibhi drashta
drishyer buddhyadibir drashta
Lakshane anumapake
lakshaner anumapake.
Bhagavan sarvabhutesu
Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu
lakshitah swatmana harihi
lakshita swatmana hari
drisyer buddhya divir adrashta
drishyer buddhyadibir drashta
lakshanay anumapakaihi
lakshaner anumapake.
Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu
Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu
lakshita swatmana hari
lakshita swatmana hari
drishyair buddhyadibhir drashta
drishyer buddhyadibir drashta
lakshanair anumapakai.
lakshaner anumapake. Vaishnavis?
Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu
Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu
lakshita svatmana hari
lakshita swatmana hari
drishyer buddhyadibhir drashta
drishyer buddhyadibir drashta
lakshaner anumapakai.
lakshaner anumapake. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, sarva, all, bhuteshu, in the living entities, lakshita, is visible, swatmana, along with the self, hari, the Lord, drishye, by what is seen, buddhi adibhi, by intelligence, drashta, one who sees, lakshane, by different signs, anumapakai, by hypothesis. Translation: the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, is in every living being along with the individual soul. And this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So before we go into the purport, I want to give a little introduction to what's happening over here. Mataji, could we get the slideshow or my laptop on the screen, please? Gotta find that border and maximize it. All right. So when we talk about the consciousness, soul, and the super soul, and that's what this verse is all about. And the roadmap of today is that we're going to start with some limitations of science, science against God, and then we'll talk about empirical evidence, and then finally we'll get into the purport, where we'll talk about consciousness, careful thought, mind-body dualism, and the missing link, which is the Paramatma. Spoiler alert. So the reason we're doing this is because Srila Prabhupada has said that we have to challenge, protest, defeat. This will be our work. Our worshipping of Krishna, that is our internal affair, and the external affair will be to establish this theory. Otherwise, they will be misleading the society. And so this is his instruction in studying science and refuting speculative scientific theories. And so I just want to give a little history about why science might be against God. Because they're humans after all. They seem like reasonable people. What's going on over there? And so we'll talk about the Roman Catholic Church. This is after Jesus came, of course. And this was before Jesus was the Greeks. The ancient Greeks ruled most of Europe. They were the most powerful force there. And they were the most intelligent culture, where they had a lot of philosophers, they had a lot of scientists, astronomers, mathematicians, and so on. And after the Greeks came the Romans, and Christianity spread throughout Europe at this time. And the Romans were the largest proponents of Christianity. They were the biggest empire of that time. And the Catholic Church, which was based in Rome, or the Vatican City right now, it wasn't very interested in science. It was all about the Bible. And so a lot of Greek literature actually got lost during this time. It was just, it was ignored. And so only the Arabs had preserved it. And that's like the 1% of Greek literature we have right now is because of the Arabs. And so during this time, they would only follow the Bible, and all the Romans would be kind of treating that as their summum bonum of all knowledge. And the Bible is not very scientific. It's a religious book. It's about God. It's about worshiping God, and so on. And so during this time, all their science was kind of based on the Bible, which was not a scientific book. And as a branch of this Catholic Church was the office of Inquisition, or the Holy Office. And this began around 12th century. And it lasted for hundreds of years. It's infamous for the killings of Muslims and Jews because the goal of this office was to suppress anything that went against Christianity and the Bible. And during the Renaissance, there was a lot of activity in science, art, philosophy, math, and so on. And it required a lot of independent thought. People were doing their own experiments. They were studying different things on their own. And this office of Inquisition would stifle that independent thought, where if anything went against the Bible, it was considered wrong, and that would be completely stifled. And so this is a big reason why the mentality of science right now has this lasting impression that religion is negative. Religion will stifle us. Religion doesn't like science. But this is really not the case in Vedic culture. Vedic culture was very open. It was all about, the concept of a muni, someone who comes up with something new. So that's already like a very open system. And so this is a very new kind of phenomenon in religious institution where it would stifle anything other than just this one source of knowledge that didn't cover everything. And the famous example where it set this up was Galileo's trial. And basically, Galileo was an eccentric person. If you went up to him and you said hi, he might shrug you off or be a little rude. And that was his kind of vibe. That's how he was as a person. And he was very aggressive in that way. And during this time, he supported Copernicus, who brought up this heliocentric model that the sun is the center of the solar system, and the Earth revolves around the sun, and all the planets revolve around the sun. Now, this wasn't very groundbreaking at that time. You're just changing the positions. Earth is in the center, or sun is in the center. It doesn't change the orbits. It doesn't change the days. It doesn't change anything really. It's just relativity because you're in space. How do you know what is even stationary? So it's just a matter of a point of reference. And he was really into this theory, and he really supported this argument. And the church kind of like brushed it aside. It wasn't a big deal because he's teaching in his own institution. We don't need to worry about that. But Galileo wanted to pick a fight. And so he really wanted to establish his theory that everything revolved around the sun. And the church did not like that. And this holy office put him on trial. And this is the infamous trial where because he went against the Bible, where the Bible has mentions of geocentricity, where everything revolves around the earth because earth is God's greatest creation, and so everything must revolve around God's greatest creation. And he stood up to this office, and he was arrested. He was put on house arrest, and he was not allowed to teach. And although it wasn't a very extreme punishment compared to what the Holy Office had done previously, this impression that science and religion are at odds, that they're fighting always, really started from this moment. This is one of the big ones. And that's the reason why a lot of scientists just naturally, because they grow up in an environment where this culture is set up, where God really has no place in science, we have this impression that they're against each other, that God has just nothing to do with it. They're opposite. And so we're just humanizing scientists because they're just following their own traditions. And this tradition comes from this impression, from this trial over here. And so this is just important to know, especially as devotees, because sometimes we might think, oh, you're just completely, you're just saying bogus things. How can you not believe this? This is so rational. But it comes from these kinds of impressions that have built over hundreds of years. Now we'll talk a little bit about empirical evidence. So when we talk about God, the soul, consciousness, and so on, very commonly the question is asked, well, what's the evidence? And what does evidence mean in modern society right now? It means empirical evidence. The definition of empirical evidence is evidence derived from experience. And so there's a large emphasis in modern science for this kind of evidence and this type of argument as well, using empirical evidence. And the scientific method really capitalizes on this form of understanding. Using our senses, or using their senses, scientists can understand a lot of different things. It's like a child breaking apart a clock. When you break it apart, you see all the different components, and then you put it back together. And then you understand how a clock works. You know how the gears change this other gear, and then that's how it works as a whole. And that works great. You can understand a lot of things, and we've done that over time, but it only works for like medium-sized things that we can do that with. When it starts becoming really, really small, we have to use instruments like microscopes or electron microscopes and all these kinds of other instruments that allow us to almost read into that zone, but we can't do it directly with our senses. And the same thing with large things. We have to use telescopes to see massive galaxies and so on. And so these methods are inherently imperfect because we're just trying to extend our grasp more and more, and the margin of error increases the further you extend your grasp from these medium-sized things. And so our philosophy says that it's always imperfect. In fact, it's just because we have to rely on our mind and senses. We have defects in our minds and senses. Prabhupada calls it really nicely in a purport. He calls it the 4 tendencies of malpractice. We tend to have these things that make us do malpractice, where we're not able to see things sometimes if our eyes are affected by dust. We're not able to always be truthful. Sometimes we want to get that paper out because my job depends on it. And so you're not going to worry about the credibility or just the accuracy of everything sometimes. And so there's a lot of examples of this in science. And what our philosophy says is that this is imperfect. Empirical evidence is imperfect. But there's a really key point here that sometimes I think I would miss, and I think sometimes others also miss. It's not wrong. When it's imperfect, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that it's not complete. And so there are many cases where science is right. It can say something right, but it doesn't mean that it's perfect. It's not absolute truth. And this is easy to see when someone puts out a study of anything with empirical evidence as their backing. You can ask a ton of questions. For example, there's a study on there's a control group of humans, and then there's a trial group of humans that are taking some medicine, whatnot. You can talk about those kinds of humans. Like, why did you choose this group? This group is not actually covering the entire population. It doesn't consider this part of the world. It doesn't consider this age group. These humans have a different experience. Their age is this. It could be some other factor that wasn't even a part of your experiment. And there are so many things that you can ask for any empirical evidence that is given, and this will just never end. And so it's clear to see that it's imperfect, and scientists also acknowledge this. And so it's a good step to start with this argument. And if someone's really stubborn, what is the empirical evidence of Krishna consciousness? How can we see the soul in the world? We say we have some evidence. We don't rely on it, but we have some for you, just for you. We have a little bit of evidence. And with empirical evidence, we can't really understand the important things. We can't understand Krishna. We can't understand bhakti. We can't understand love. These kinds of things that is just out of the grasp of empirical evidence. But we can understand some things, not understand, but see some things. And we can repeat, again, that this is not what we rely on, but this is what we can give you. So that now when you're trying to fit a mathematical model or a physical model, you're not yet to consider all the evidence. Now consider this one. How do you make sense of this with your theory? And the most famous ones, I won't go into too much detail, but the most famous ones for the soul are these 2 examples. One are out-of-body experiences, where someone's in a surgery and they're unconscious, but after the surgery, they're able to recall a lot of details of that surgery, what they saw, what the nurses were talking about, what the surgeons were talking about, what they look like, and so on. And so there's an out-of-body experience. It shows that there is something other than the body that is the observer. And then there's also this famous reincarnation story, this girl named Shukla, who used to play with dolls in her home, and she would call them like family names, and almost like she knew them. And so her family took her to this village of Bhatpara, which was what she would talk about. She's like, they're from Bhatpara. And she picked out her previous family members from a crowd in that village, and just from a bunch of strangers. And so this is an example of how this was her previous life. And she was a part of this family, and someone had died, and now she was reborn. And she had those impressions from the previous life with her. And these are actually unbiased studies that have been rigorously evaluated. It's not just a tabloid article, but these have been really studied. And there's many more instances of these kinds of phenomena in the world. But again, these are just examples. They're not proof. We can't say that because of this, the soul exists. That's not how it works, because it goes against our own philosophy, because we don't believe in it, in saying anything like that. We don't believe in empirical evidence. And so these examples are there to convince, but not establish the notion of the spirit soul. And that's something that's pretty common in these kinds of discussions, because there's no such thing as proving by argument in the real world. In math, you have it. You can logically prove something in math. But in the real world, there's no way to prove anything. It's all about convincing arguments. Arguments are there to convince. And empirical evidence is also there to convince, because it's a very simple way of convincing someone. I saw it, here you go. But it's not complete. And so now, could we go back to the purport, please, Mataji? Now we'll start talking about consciousness. This kind of sets up the discussion, and we'll get into the details. So the purport. Actually, let's read the translation just one more time so we remember what's going on. We could scroll up just a bit. The translation. The personality of God, Lord Sri Krishna, is in every living being, along with the individual soul. And this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. Purport. The general argument of the common man is that since the Lord is not visible to our eyes, how can one either surrender unto him or render transcendental loving service unto him? Pretty common question, right? A lot of people would ask that. I ask that a lot. To such a common man, here is a practical suggestion given by Srila Shukadev Goswami as to how one can perceive the Supreme Lord by reason and perception. Actually, the Lord is not perceivable by our present materialized senses, but when one is convinced of the presence of the Lord by a practical service attitude, there is a revelation by the Lord's mercy. And such a pure devotee of the Lord can perceive the Lord's presence always and everywhere. Now that's very hard, but there's an easier way to get to a lower level of perception. He can perceive that intelligence is the form direction of the Paramatma plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. This is an interesting word, form direction. I searched it up. No one's ever used this word anywhere. And I was like, well, what does it mean? So I asked ChatGPT. And I think it gave a pretty good answer to me. And what it's basically saying is that the Paramatma gives direction. Because he's in our heart, he gives us direction. We'll talk more about that. And the form of that direction is our intelligence. So that's the form direction of the plenary portion, or the Paramatma. The presence of Paramatma in everyone's company is not very difficult to realize, even for the common man. And I'll just say, the common man for Srila Prabhupada is very advanced, as we'll see. So we'll take our time understanding this. The procedure is as follows. One can perceive one's self-identification and feel positively that he exists. Now, if you're at a Bhagavatam class on a Saturday morning, you probably know you exist. So I think we got to that sentence. He may not feel it very abruptly, but by using a little intelligence, he can feel that he is not the body. Now, this is a little harder, but Prabhupada explains how. He can feel that the hand, the leg, the head, the hair, and the limbs are all his bodily parts and parcels. No one's identifying with their hand or leg. Parts and parcels, where was I? But as such, the hand, the leg, the head, etc., cannot be identified with his self. So I can't identify with myself with these things. Maybe my whole body is myself, but not each part. So I can't break it down more than that. Therefore, just by using intelligence, he can distinguish and separate his self from other things that he sees. So the natural conclusion is that the living being, either man or beast, is the seer, and he sees besides himself all other things. So there is a difference between the seer and the seen. Now this is a very interesting definition of self. the soul is kind of abstract. Well, what is the soul? Like, that's just a definition of who you are, but what does that mean? You can go into like spark and you can talk about the size and how it's unbreakable, but that doesn't mean anything to me. This is a really interesting definition of self. It's the seer. It's the person who is seeing. What are you seeing? You're not seeing material objects necessarily, but you're seeing a qualitative experience of those objects that you're seeing. And this is a little different. It's not physical. It's qualitative. It's called qualia in the study of consciousness. It's like a mental image that you have that describes the qualitative feeling of a certain thing that you see. And now we'll go into the details of that. So let's go back to the slides, and we'll unpack this simple procedure that is fit for a common man. And we'll talk about consciousness. The initial point is that it's beyond matter, and this sometimes is hard to establish, especially in scientific circles. But it's becoming a lot more easier because there are many scientists that are now accepting that we're clearly ignoring this. And the key point here is that it can be understood in physical terms. And it's difficult to grasp and accept because it introduces a new variable. It introduces a new variable that you cannot explain physically. And so then it ruins physical science or physics. And there's a lot of propaganda, as Sadhbhuta Prabhu says, that the mind and conscious self is just like the software. So this is a common conception we have in school, even, that the mind and the brain, the mind is the software and the brain is the hardware. That's where everything is happening. Our mind is kind of just programming that. And when we bring up consciousness, the response is, oh, that's just the software. It's all about the transmissions that revolve in the brain, the neural transmissions in the brain. And so it just leads to some manipulation of data in our brain, and then these nerve impulses, synapses, and so on, and that's what we perceive. That is our mind. And then another thing that is explained on top of that is that they cannot explain. So that's a weird explanation of the mind, first of all, because it's clearly not that. It's clearly more than that. It's not just the nerve impulses, but there's more things that they say that they cannot say about. With nerve impulses, there's something called sparseness. So the dog on the left, that's what you see, right? You go out in nature, you see a dog, it probably looks like the one on the left. But actually, what your brain gets as data is the thing on the right. That's not a lot, right? Could you tell that's a dog if they just gave you that? Like, probably, but you don't have no clue what the color is. You don't really know what type of dog it is even. You can't even see the tips of the ears. And so this is something called sparseness or neural sparseness. When we see things, our brain actually only takes in a very sparse part of the data. And that's actually what our brain is taking. So how are we seeing a dog? How are we having that qualitative experience of color, shape, sound, and so on when this is our visual sparseness? And a lot of scientists just say we're nature's best guessing machines. We're really good at guessing from that's a dog. And then the idea is hallucination is when your guessing machine is out of order and you're just like guessing all kinds of weird things. But it does not really explain the direct perception that we have of the stimuli being that image, as they exist. It doesn't tell us, because we can see it for sure, but it cannot explain that as they exist. And so they cannot be certain that perception is purely a neural process, or rather we cannot be certain that it's a completely neural process, because it cannot explain, again, that qualitative nature of our experiences. And so our consciousness really has nothing to do with these nerve impulses. Our consciousness is directly what we perceive. And for example, over here in this gathering, I see all of you. That is my perception. I see this room, I see the deities, I see the chair, I see the zafu. I see all of that. And to describe it, I can use physical terms. I can be like, okay, there's a wall, this is the dimension of the wall, this is the color of the wall, this is the height, this is the color of that chair, this is how it looks. I can describe it perfectly in physical terms, but we never talk about nerve impulses when I describe it. I describe it for what it is. And I don't talk about the data transmission in my brain or anything like that. And so consciousness can be described with a very specific vocabulary. And it's very hard to tie down those words to the physical level. Very hard. For example, like color. I see this shade of, I don't know, what shade is this? This wall color? Beige. Okay, I see beige on the wall. How do I describe that in purely physical terms? Like maybe I can go to the details of wavelengths of light, and this is the color of beige on that wavelength, but it doesn't do anything with my perception of beigeness. My perception of beigeness is indescribable in physical terms. It's just my perception. And so this is it's hard to understand this. It's a little nuanced, but we'll talk more about it. The perception is one, because you're a seer, you're an observer, and what you observe cannot be described purely physically. There's an argument that comes out of this by scientists called supervenience. So it's a reductionist theory. Reductionist means like you're trying to reduce everything into matter. And the idea is that our qualitative experience is actually just an experience of the property of that matter. So it's not like we're creating a new experience, we're just understanding the property of some matter. For example, again with light, when I experience color, I'm only experiencing a property of light, but I'm not experiencing color as is. And so this is this idea, but I've got an experiment for you. So let's all close our eyes, like close them tight. Okay, do you see anything? No color, black? Yes? Okay, now press your eyes with your fingers hard. Do you see some color there? You had a qualitative experience of some color because your pressure, it fired your cones in your eyes and it created some stimuli for your brain that allowed you to have a qualitative experience of color without any light. You can open your eyes now. And so you have a qualitative experience of color without any light involved. And so the supervenience is basically disproved because it's not always about the property of matter. It's actually my experience inside. It's internal and it's different from the brain data. Another thing that cannot be explained through the brain model is feeling. As you can see, this is like maybe your Uber driver when you get on a call or something. And with perceptions, they come feelings and emotions and desires and so on. How do you explain that? We have good vocabulary to explain these things. We have anger, we have disgust, we have happiness, we have joy, we have thoughtfulness, care, so on. We have so many words for it, but you can't reduce it any further, right? It's just anger. Anger is anger. You can have a little discussion in physical terms, like, okay, with anger means my heart rate is high, certain active regions in my brain are firing, so many symptoms of anger, but they do not describe the feeling of anger. They describe the symptoms of anger that we feel in our body. And so this feeling is actually something internal, and this is a visceral experience for all of us. We can all feel specific emotions, and it cannot be described in physical terms. You can't reduce it further than just that emotion itself. And the argument that comes out of this is that it's evolutionary residue. If consciousness cannot be described using physical terms, then it just doesn't exist. That makes sense, right? Probably not. The argument is that if you want to define consciousness, you will use terms to refer to consciousness, right? If I want to define consciousness, I'll talk about consciousness, and that's circular reasoning. And I talk about the feelings, the emotions, which are states of consciousness. And this is how I define it. And then what they say is that that's circular reasoning. You're just going, you're just proving it by its own thing. And the idea is that this term of consciousness is actually evolutionary residue. And so like over time, humans have come to understand things. When we were primitive and we had, stone tools or whatnot, we would think about evil spirits because we don't know how weather worked. Like, oh, the evil spirits are here. That's why there's a hurricane or whatnot. But now we know that's just a bunch of air going around. It's just a tornado that happened because of this reason. It's not evil spirit. And so in the same way, consciousness is also just residue from our evolution, where we actually should just stop saying, I feel angry, but I should say my C fibers are firing or something like that, and describe it purely in physical terms because we have to advance as human society. We have to, get rid of this residue that we have. And this is absurd because these states of consciousness are clearly real. We clearly experience them and they're meaningful to us. And so we cannot reject them because it cannot be explained in physical terms. This is abductive reasoning, where you're not able to prove that it doesn't exist, but you're just trying to say like, okay, this is my assumption because I only believe that the world is physical, and so it's you're abducting this consciousness term, and so this is a very simple way to speak to this argument. And so now there's an aspect of reality, which is consciousness, that is outside our physical terms. And the states of consciousness also, feelings, emotions, perceptions, qualitative experience, and so on, also outside physical terms. And we know consciousness is real because I'm conscious. I know I'm conscious, I know my consciousness is real, and the whole science of physics says absolutely nothing about consciousness, because now there's something real in nature that cannot be described by physics. It cannot be understood by physics. And so the argument is made that consciousness is subjective. What does subjective mean? Subjective is, the Oxford definition, is based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions. It basically, like, subjective means the subject is me, and this is my experience, this is my knowledge of myself, and this is only related to me. And so we might say consciousness is subjective because only I can experience my own consciousness, only I know I'm conscious. I have no clue about the rest of the world. It only exists within me. And so that's one way to kind of say it's real, but it's only here. And to that we have an interesting argument because we can actually do the same thing to matter if we think of it like that. Because I can only talk about my subjective impressions of my consciousness. It can't be something objectively real, but with matter is the same thing. I'm conscious, I know that. I have perceptions of different things, including other objects. I have perceptions of this carpet, this table, this laptop, and so on. But how do I actually know they're material objects? Sometimes we might have an existential crisis in bed, just like, are these real objects? And so, like, how do we know? And they only exist actually in my perception, right? Because I can only perceive things through my senses, and that's all I know that exists out there. That's how I can tell this is matter, and so on. And so I'm actually inferring that there are things out there. I don't know that. I'm just inferring because that's what matter is. Everyone says that's what matter is, and so that's matter. And you're inferring that from your experience that you have. And so all my perceptions that I have fit together with this model that there is something out there. There is matter out there, and it never fails to fit. And so I infer that it is actually out there. In the same way, we can see consciousness in others because I see other people acting like me. I see other people having emotions. I see other people having feelings, having their own qualitative experiences of this world. And so they're having symptoms of consciousness. And so I can infer because I'm conscious, they're also conscious in the same way. And so consciousness is actually objective. It is universal. It's among all humans, at least. We can see it in a monkey, maybe like a dog. We can see it. I don't know about an earthworm. We don't have to go into that, but we can see it in humans for sure, and we can see it in some big animals where we can recognize their mood and so on. And so it really just comes down to common sense, where if you start saying it's subjective, you're saying matter is subjective, which is quite an exhausting life. And if you take it to the extreme, it's called solipsism, which is really interesting, where nothing in the world exists outside of me and my own perceptions. And this is a fun way to describe solipsism. So there's this guy so there are two people talking. Hey, got any plans for the weekend? Yeah, I'm having a solipsis convention. Okay, that sounds really cool. Can I come? Well, if you existed, I wouldn't be having it. And so that's how solipsism works. It's very exhausting. And so this is quite absurd, but this is the extreme version of this. And so we can definitely argue that consciousness is real. It at least exists in every human being, maybe dogs, maybe monkeys, and so on. And it cannot be explained in terms of physics. So we're on the same page right now. And now the world of scientists is trying to put this together. How can you understand physics now? Because physics is incomplete. There's a new variable that's real. It's in nature, and it does, and I can't explain it. And so this was actually something that was thought about a lot, especially a couple hundred years ago, or not actually a couple hundred, like 100 years ago or so, by Thomas Huxley. So he was Darwin's bulldog, as a lot of people say. Darwin's theory would not have gotten out without Huxley. He just kind of did his own thing, had his own book, he did it, and that was it. He didn't worry about marketing. But Thomas Huxley really liked his book, and he really liked his theories, and he was all about preaching it. And he would go to all these institutions and preach Darwinism and the theory of evolution. And he also recognized in the 1800s that, okay, consciousness is real. He recognized that. And he was like, how do I explain this? Because he was very stubborn, or not stubborn, but he was very confident that the laws of motion, Newton's laws of motion, are everything in the world. They describe everything that happens in the world. Everything can be described by this. Of course, that's not true anymore. We know that now in physics as well. But that's what his notion was in the 1800s. And he was like, matter is the only thing out there that can actually do things. How can consciousness now be a part of it? And so he called it an epiphenomenon. Basically, matter can influence consciousness. That's quite obvious. My car burns down, I'm pretty sad because it influences my consciousness. The matter does. If there's a block or if there's a ball getting thrown at me, I react to that. I'm getting scared, or maybe I'm catching it and I feel good. So we feel things from matter. There's clearly a link there. You can't deny that. But is there a link between consciousness and matter? Can consciousness or our mind influence matter? And basically what he said was no. It's just a one-way link. And this is what is called an epiphenomenon. This is a fun picture I created with ChatGPT because no one has a picture relating to this word. But it's just a one-way street. And he concluded he concluded this theory. And Eugene Wigner, who was one of the theoretical physicists of the last century, he was at Princeton, and he actually won the Nobel Prize in physics. So he was a very learned person. And he responded to Huxley's thought. And what he said was, in nature, we always see that if A influences B, B also influences A. It's never just one way. Even if it's a little influence, it's always two-way. And so it's unreasonable to think that consciousness cannot influence matter if matter can influence consciousness. And what he actually said was that physics can never be complete. It's just an approximation. And this is interesting because we're not saying physics is wrong. We're not saying that it is, we're not saying that it is bogus or anything, but it's imperfect. It's just an approximation. The world is Krishna's creation, and Krishna's creation is not chaotic. It's not random. There's order to it. There are patterns that we can clearly see. If I throw a ball that way, it's going to go that way. It's not going to circle back and hit me in the head. And so there is clearly order, and we can observe that, as scientists do. They observe patterns. They observe how things move in this world. But it doesn't cover everything. That's the key point here. Rather, there are situations where something unexpected or supernatural can occur, and that's where consciousness influences matter. And this is very interesting. It's hard to understand sometimes, but slowly we get to this point where it's real. It can influence matter because it must, and we'll see some examples of that. And this just shows that material science, in the most literal term, material science, study of matter, is fundamentally limited because you cannot explain this new variable of consciousness. So I'm conscious. Srila Prabhupada said that, and he said that a common man can understand it, and so we've tried to do that. Of course, in his 3 sentences, it's kind of difficult. But now we know we're a non-physical, conscious being. And now we can go back to the purport and look into it a little bit. Actually, before we do that, one more point to make. The unit of consciousness. So now what is selfhood? What is our self? We called ourselves a seer, right? We have consciousness. So a really nice definition of Atma, or the self, is it's a fundamental unit of consciousness. It's an individual unit of consciousness. So souls are just units of consciousness. And that's just the definition of it. The mechanics of a soul are not important. to the modern world because it's just a definition, you know. This is like, okay, now you got to this point, you have nothing to explain this anyway. I'll give you a definition here. And so that's how that works. And so the subject of our personal experiences, or the I in who I am, is this Atma, or the soul, which is a unit of consciousness. And this is actually the smallest individual entity that possesses consciousness, and that's the Atma. And now we can go back into the purport, where it'll now talk about the link between spirit and matter. How does consciousness actually influence matter? How does that happen? Mataji, could we go back to the purport, please? So there's a difference between the seer and the seen. Now, by a little use of intelligence, we can also readily agree that the living being who sees the things beyond himself by ordinary vision has no power to see or move independently. That's hard-hitting. I feel like I can move my stuff independently. I think I can see independently. That's all what I'm doing. And so Prabhupada explains it a little bit. All our ordinary actions and perceptions depend on various forms of energy supplied to us by nature in various combinations. Our senses of perception and of action, that is to say, our 5 perceptive senses of hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell, as well as our 5 senses of action, namely hands, legs, speech, evacuation organs, and reproductive organs, and also our 3 subtle senses, namely the mind, intelligence, and ego, 13 senses in all, are supplied to us by various arrangements of gross or subtle forms of natural energy. So this is an interesting breakdown. So when we say that we're independent, we kind of think ourselves as a whole constituent. Like body is me, the entire body, not a part, but the entire body is me. And so when I move my hand, when I see something, I'm doing it because the whole body is me. But actually, if you break it down, there's senses involved. We have these 13 different senses that are there. And so when we analyze how we see, we're seeing through our eyes. And where is that energy supplied from? It's supplied by nature. And so we can kind of see that, okay, I'm not completely independent. There's just a correlation between my desire and what's actually happening. And it is equally evident that our objects of perception are nothing but the products of inexhaustible permutations and combinations of the forms taken by natural energy. What it's basically saying is that everything we see is matter. That it's just combinations of different elements of matter. As this conclusively proves that the ordinary living being has no independent power of perception or of motion, and as we undoubtedly feel our existence being conditioned by nature's energy, we conclude that he who sees is spirit, and that the senses as well as the objects of perception are material. This is also another very interesting point. We're distinguishing between matter and spirit. Our senses are actually matter. Our bodies matter, clearly, but the spirit is the one who sees, and everything that we're seeing and everything that we are seeing with or moving with is also matter, is rather matter. And if we scroll up just a little bit, there's another point here that I wanted to mention. By being conditioned by nature's energy. So this word condition is also really interesting. It's kind of commonly used in Prabhupada's work and so on. What does it mean? In probability theory, condition basically means if this is happening, then what happens? So you're conditioned on some premise. And so in the same way, we're conditioned by nature's supplying of energy to our senses. If our eyes stop working, which is not what I independently control, clearly, because I can't control when my eyes start working, when my eyes don't, I'm conditioned by nature's supply of energy. In the same way, I'm conditioned how I can move. Some people can run really fast because they are conditioned in a way where they can. And so some people can't even walk. And it's not our independent control that is defining that, rather it is supplied by nature. The spiritual quality of the seer is manifest in our dissatisfaction with the limited state of materially conditioned existence. So this is also another interesting thing. The spiritual quality is just our dissatisfaction. And this is where Krishna consciousness kind of comes in. We're not trying to prove anything different. We're just trying to add to it. That, we can feel that we are something more than just this body and matter. That is the difference between spirit and matter. There are some less intelligent arguments that matter develops the power of seeing and moving as a certain organic development. But such an argument cannot be accepted because there is no experimental evidence that matter has anywhere produced a living entity. Trust no future, however pleasant. Idle talks regarding future development of matter into spirit are actually foolish because no matter has ever developed the power of seeing or moving in any part of the world. By moving, it does not mean a robot. It means in the same way of independently seeing it, like that qualitative experience of it. Therefore, it is definite that matter and spirit are two different identities, and this conclusion is arrived at by the use of intelligence. So we use a lot of intelligence till now. It's been an hour of intelligence. And so we've got to this point. It's really hard. But are we on the same page right now? We're here, okay. Now we come to the point that the things which are seen by a little use of intelligence cannot be animate unless we accept someone as the user of or director of intelligence. Intelligence gives one direction, like some higher authority, and the living being cannot see or move or eat or do anything without the use of intelligence. Now, this is something we can actually experience. And as Prabhupada says, okay, a lot of scientists say, well, it might change in the future. But we can experience for ourselves that no matter is moving or acting in any way unless it's being directed by some user. And that can be directed by a user hundreds of years ago, or it can be directed by a user actively. Even things like AI are really machines in the end. It's just a probability guessing machine. It just guesses what word you're going to use next, and it's really good at it. And that's just what AI is. And so there is no independent perception or direction that is given. And it's a really interesting point also in the Knowledge Illusion book written by, I'm forgetting from which university, but it's a researcher. And Vaisheshika Prabhu was speaking to him because he was interested in the 4 questions. And in this book, he basically talks about the difference between AI and human, or just machine and human. And it's that humans can share intentionality. We can share intention, but a machine really can't do that. It can't share our intention inherently, but we can do that as humans. So there's a clear difference over there as well. And another thing that's mentioned is that intelligence is kind of the active force here. It's the direction that is allowing matter to move and allowing us to move even. When one fails to take advantage of intelligence, he becomes a deranged man. And so a living being is dependent on intelligent or the direction of a superior being. Now, that's something we've seen. We've seen deranged people, and it's clear that their intelligence is not really helping them out. And such intelligence is all-pervading. Actually, I think I missed one. And so a living being is dependent on intelligence or the direction of a superior being. Again, this is a little nuanced point. Okay, well, now you got a superior being into this? How did that happen? He just quickly snuck it in without you even realizing. And we'll talk about this, because there's intelligence that comes from different sources, especially inspiration. That's where we can kind of realize that form direction of the Paramatma. Such intelligence is all-pervading. Such intelligence means the direction from the superior being. So it's a distinction there. Our intelligence is not all-pervading. Every living being has his intelligence, and this intelligence, being the direction of some higher authority, is just like a father giving direction to his son. So it's like a guiding intelligence. The higher authority who is present and residing within every individual living being is the super soul, or the super self, sorry. That's a big point. So now we're going to try to unpack this and do it slowly again, because Prabhupada just sneaks it in, and then you don't even know. You're like, I'm already believing in the super soul, and you don't even realize. Could we go back to the slides, Mataji? And so there's clearly a link between spirit and matter. There's consciousness. I can see that I'm not in control of material energy to some level because, I'm not able to really independently move things in my body. There's a lot of stuff going on in my body, like my digestive system, and I have no clue how it works. And it just goes, I didn't, in the womb, I wasn't like, this is exactly how you digest my food. This is exactly how you'll do it. This is exactly how you grow these bones, etc. It just happens. And so it's beyond our control. When it doesn't work, we can do things that help it, but it's, again, beyond our control. The exact mechanics of how our body works is beyond our control. In the same way, our senses, things that we can actually, constantly use, our eyes, our mouth to speak and so on, we feel like we're doing that pretty independently, right? That's happening from our within, but actually it's energy supplied by nature. And so what is that link right there? Because I feel like I'm doing it, but I'm not actually doing it. So what's actually doing it? And that's what we're going to talk about now. Because various things happen according to my desire. There's a clear correlation there. If I want to move my head that way, my head actually moved that way. And I desired to do it, and it moved. And then if I want to see that thing, I can see that thing because I desired to see it. And so there's a key phrase for I want to. There's a desire here to do something, and then that thing happens usually. Of course, desires like I want to be the richest person on earth, probably not going to happen immediately, but I can see that, I can walk there and so on. So various things are happening according to my desire. And another thing I can notice is that there's some guiding intelligence sometimes in my life. Not when I need it, but there's some there's guiding intelligence in my life. I can see that there's something in my system and my intelligence that's coming from a place where it never existed there. Like it's not from what I experienced before, it's just coming from somewhere else. Where is that coming from? And the answer is the super soul, as Prabhupada says. And so by careful thought, as Prabhupada's words are, by careful thought, we'll keep going. Where are we right now? I'm non-physical. We got that? I want a verbal yes. All right. You can say no too, and we can go back. I'm conscious? Yes? Okay. I'm dependent on my senses. Is that easy to understand that we are dependent? It takes some time, but you eventually get to that point because they're supplied by something else. I don't control matter. Now this is harder. You don't have to say yes immediately. From this, it is clear that we don't control matter because I'm not independent of my senses. I can't control them, and so I clearly can't control matter. Because the only way I perceive matter, move matter, direct matter is through my senses. That is the agency, that's the apparatus I use to dictate matter. I use my senses. And so I actually don't control matter, if you think about it. But I do control my desire. And I desire something, and things happen according to it. So what is that link? And the source of inspiration, this guiding intelligence, is really interesting. And this is in the translation. This is what Shukadeva Goswami says. One can see that one can perceive the super soul through two ways. One is by understanding that he is the seer, and the other is by understanding where his intelligence comes from. Where is that intelligence from? That's from some higher, superior source. Being is that's another step, but it's some source. We know that. And many mathematicians, scientists, artists, musicians, and so on have commented on this phenomena of inspiration. One of the biggest examples is Mozart, who's pictured up here. And he would always say, symphonies would just come in my head, and I would just play them, and it would just come. He didn't do anything extra; it just would come. And he's like, it came from some superior place. It came from some guiding intelligence, and this is also consistent with what a lot of mathematicians say, where you're working on a project, you're working on a proof, and then all of a sudden now you know how to solve it because some inspiration came in, and now you have this idea that makes it all make sense, the eureka moment, as we know it. And so there's clearly ideas and intelligence coming from some subliminal self that is within us, some other part of our being that feels like it's not us, right? It doesn't feel like it's coming from me, it's coming from somewhere else. And this is, it's superior to our conscious self, clearly, because it's giving us things that we don't have. It's giving us something new. And so by this idea of inspiration, we can feel it in our own lives too. Of course, not at the level of maybe Mozart or Poincaré with proofs and so on, but we can feel it. There's sometimes inspiration to like move your car to the other lane when someone's about to just like ram you over there. You had no clue, and you just had inspiration to move. You can see it in animals. Where do they get their instinct from? Where is that from? Is that their own desire? Do they have that from some superior guiding intelligence? How does that work? And so by careful thought, again, we understand two things. We're not in control of material energy, but we're able to influence matter somehow. And also, we sometimes take help from a guiding intelligence that is beyond our own conscious effort. Now, this is a really interesting term, conscious effort, because when I do conscious effort, things come from my own self, my own intelligence. But there is something that's giving me intelligence that is outside of my conscious effort, and that's called the guiding intelligence. And so again, like a father and son, as Srila Prabhupada says. And so to understand this, we're gonna bring up this very common model that a lot of scientists and philosophers use nowadays called the mind-body model, or mind-body dualism. And this was constructed by Descartes, who was a French mathematician and philosopher during the Renaissance. And he was a very crucial figure in analytical geometry and physical science. You know, if you studied in class Cartesian plane, and then the grid, then you can take it to 3D. The Cartesian is this Descartes. And so Cartesian geometry was his theory of the world. You can describe everything in terms of this geometry. And so later in his life, actually, he became a lot more reclusive and alone, and he wanted to have a very peaceful environment to finish all his intellectual work. And so that's the kind of person he was. He was a very powerful figure in France, actually, during that time. He had a lot of influence over society as a teacher and a thinker. And he also explored metaphysics a lot. This is a more unknown part of his research. The famous part, of course, is the geometric side of it, which we still do a lot of work in. But he recognized the existence of the mind and consciousness. And he was influential in developing this mind-body dualism model and just modern philosophy of how the mind interacts with matter. So this is Cartesian dualism, or mind-body dualism. And dualism just basically means that there are two different things. There's a mind, there's a body. Now, how do they interact is really the question. And that's what philosophers have been trying to understand for hundreds of years. How do they interact? How do they influence each other? And of course, Vedic philosophy has its own explanations. He called matter something called res extensa, which means that it extends into space. So matter is everything that extends into space, like our Cartesian grid, right? It extends into infinity. And so matter can be described in terms of points, lines, and edges, and so on. And you can be familiar with Cartesian geometry, and then you can understand a whole physical model of the world through this. And it makes sense. Everything in this room I can explain in Cartesian geometry. Can I explain the universe? Maybe not. But I can explain everything in this room. And so that's matter. And then the mind is something different. The mind has the power to think. This is interesting. It has the power to think. And he admitted that consciousness and the mind are actually different, but he wasn't able to define that really. He just said that they might be different. And the main point here is that it's completely different from matter. And he believed that they shared a two-way influence. So this is different from that epiphenomenon theory of Thomas Huxley, where matter clearly influences the mind. As I said, my car is burning down, I'm sad. And when matter moves, my mind perceives it. I can see that. I have a qualitative experience of matter moving. If I see like a toy just going across the room, I have some perception and qualitative experience of that. I have a qualia in my brain, some mental qualitative experience of it. But how does consciousness or the mind influence matter? And he believed this, but he didn't really know how to explain it. He said, this is what he said. He said, somehow when our mind wills, matter moves. How does that happen? When my mind wills, my matter moves. And he did not know how to explain this. And a lot of scientists have made progress in understanding matter. And so slowly this idea of mind in this dualism model was ignored. because we're understanding matter right now. Res extensa, that's what we care about, and it just kind of phased out. But this is a very common discussion, especially in modern philosophy, of how to explain what is going on. And one might say there's really no empirical evidence of consciousness influencing matter, because I feel that on my own. I feel that, okay, I'm not directly doing it, something is doing it for me. I desire and matter moves, but is that really empirically true? And there's this really interesting lab in Princeton. So they weren't associated with the college. The college didn't fund them. They're very, Princeton is very akin to letting everyone know that, because it's a little deviant from what you would usually see in a university. But it was the Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. So you can already tell it's going to be some wacky stuff going on over there. And for about 30 years, from 1979 to 2007, there's these two researchers, Robert John and Brenda Dunn. They were basically studying how consciousness, or your intent, can influence matter. How does that happen? They were trying to study it and see it. And what they did, they had tons of experiments over these 30 years, all kinds of stuff, where they'd have like a random number machine, and then they would have a person really focus on a number. And then what they noticed is that number would come up more often than the others at a very small rate, extremely small, but it'd come up a little more. And they do other things with pendulums, like this is an example of someone. They have a pendulum in front of them, and then they make the person focus on what rate they want that pendulum to slow down at. And actually it would slow down slightly deviant from its normal expected, what's the word? The expected way that it would work. And they noticed that human intent has a connection with matter. They did not say that it directly influences. Of course, they said there's a correlation clearly. And there's, of course, a lot of research that's trying to explain this, and a lot of things like, just the vibrations in the room, where like your intent, somehow nerve impulses are affecting the chair you're on, that are affecting the noise machine that is creating the random numbers. But what they noticed was also like, if someone had an intent across the room, in a different room, the same results would show. And so, of course, we don't rely on empirical evidence again. And so this is just an example that there is some study that has been done to see that consciousness clearly can influence matter. And their conclusion, after 30 years of research, was this. This is a quote from them. The enormous databases produced by PEAR provide clear evidence that human thought and emotion can produce measurable influences on physical reality. And so now, what is this missing link? We all know there's a link now. There has to be something. No one knows how to explain it. No one's really trying to explain it, because you got to talk about all these superior entities. And so I'm going to bring up the Vedic conception, because this is a hole that we can fill, where we can easily bring up Vedas. We're like, okay, now you have a hole. Okay, you want to know how to explain it? Here, I got an explanation for you. If you got a better one, sure, go for it. But I have an explanation for you, and if it makes sense to you, then that's great. And that's what we're trying to do over here. Firstly, there's a difference in what matter is in the Vedas. Matter is not just a physical blob of substance. Matter is energy. This is kind of interesting. It's different from what we think in science, because matter is the energy of the Lord. It's the inferior potency of the Lord. And we can definitely perceive different patterns in the world. We can see how different things move, especially in our medium range. We can see how clock works. Clearly, we understand matter to some level. We're not dumb. It's just not all unknown to us. We can understand it. But because it's the energy of the Lord, ultimately the Lord has control over it. It's controlled by spirit. And that's how we can explain things like a mountain being lifted by a pinking, by a stone melting, by the Lord drying the entire ocean, or disappearing, and all that, and like objects disappearing. How does that happen? Because it's His energy. It's not just physical gross blobs, but it's actually His energy. And so He has full control over it. He can change it in any way He wants. And we're just perceiving this, and we're perceiving these patterns, and that's all we know. But there's so much more to it, because it's His energy, and they have their natural laws and so on. The bottom line is, it's not above His control. And so the link between the spirit and matter is the super self or the super soul. It's called Paramatma, which literally means super Atma. And he resides in every living entity. And the Lord is the controller of matter. So clearly, the person who is controlling the matter that we want to control, like our hands, our legs, objects, and so on, is the Lord, right? He's the ultimate controller. And he fulfills our desire by manipulating matter according to that, according to what we want. And he basically just does it for us. And he acts also as a guiding intelligence within our self. He's there as a witness. And this is the form direction of the personality of God, or the plenary portion, where he's present in us in this form of a guiding intelligence, in inspiration and instinct, in these two different things. And so it's like two birds in a tree. It's a very famous example. It's from, I think, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, but it's a very old example that's given, where the Lord is considered both omnipotent and omniscient, right? We know that he's all-powerful and he's all-knowing. How does he do that? Because he's everywhere. And this is why it's not so unreasonable to think he's in every single person. That's how he knows everything. He's there. And he's there as a witness, like the two birds in a tree. The bird on the left is like us. We're eating the fruits, we're having fun, we're doing our thing. And the bird on the right is the super self, or the Paramatma, who is a witness. He's there to see. And if we're too busy with our things, we're not going to look back and see him, but he's always looking at us. And he's also there as a guiding intelligence, because he's right there. He knows what's going on. And this is possible because he's unlimitedly powerful, so nothing is beyond his reach. And so we understand that matter, and also the link between ourself and matter in regard to Vedic science. We understand these two components now. Yeah, we understand matter, we understand spirit, we understand the link. So now, what is our mind? What is our mind? Is it consciousness from ourselves? Is it something else? Because like in Vedic science, or in Sankhya philosophy, mind is material. It's one of these material elements that is a part of our body. It's subtle, but it's still material. It's not related to the spirit, so what is the difference there? And so we might ask, what am I if not my mind, right? Because we've just established this whole theory. All you can do is desire. And so what are you if not your mind? You have to be your mind, because that refers to my thoughts, my desires, my wills, and so on. And so the explanation is, in the Vedas, that the material mind is only an auxiliary apparatus that the soul uses when in the material body. And so the real mind is inherently part of the soul. And when the soul leaves the body, the real mind will continue to think, feel, and will. But the material mind is only associated with the material body. And it's that apparatus for our real mind to function in this body. And so that's the difference over there. So when you're desiring spiritual things, the desires of the inner self, that comes from our real mind. But the other stuff, the other thoughts and wills, they don't come from that. They come from the apparatus that is there. So it's a very subtle difference. There's a whole rabbit hole, actually, of the difference between the material mind, spiritual mind, contaminated consciousness, and all these different things, free will, all that. So that's a whole different thing, but this is a very brief understanding of that. All right, so now all I can do is desire. I desire to be Usain Bolt. Why am I not Usain Bolt? Right? I might ask that, right? If all I can do is desire, my desires work. Why don't all of them work? Why can't I be Usain Bolt? Why can't I be Shakespeare? Why can't I be better than them even? Why is that desire not being fulfilled? It's a real desire. It's in my heart. I feel it. Why is it not being fulfilled? Why is the super soul not fulfilling this one? And the answer is you need qualification. So if your desire is to be fulfilled, you need the right qualification. You need desire and qualification. And so that qualification in the Vedic science is karma. It's the accumulated activities that you've had and reactions that you've accumulated over many, many lives. And that allows you to deserve something. It makes you qualified to do something, to get something, to have your desires fulfilled by the Supreme Lord. And so the super soul acts according to the individual desire and past karma or qualification of that soul. And so Krishna, or the super self, is a fulfiller of all our desires. And that means, and this is what it means when the Lord says, "I give full facility to the living being." Because when I read something like that, I'm like, I don't think I have full facility. I don't think I have enough. There's so much more that could be done. Like, this is it. This is all you got. And then the reason is because this is how He fulfills our desires. It's through the qualification that we have. And this is also why in the Upanishad He says, "I have been fulfilling your desires since time immemorial." And we're like, what desires did you fulfill? I'm still here. Because He's been doing this. He's, as Paramatma, He's been acting as that link between spirit and matter. And the Lord is impartial. He fulfills the desires of dictators as long as their qualification allowed them to do so. As long as their karma lasted, their desires were fulfilled. He even fulfilled desires of people envious of Him. He fulfilled Hiranyakashipu's desires. He fulfilled Ravana's desires. He fulfilled many people's desires even when they were against Him. And so He's clearly impartial. And He's just fulfilling them according to the desire and qualification. And this is where we have volition or independent free will, because we're able to desire things purely based on our own self. And those desires will be fulfilled if we following the laws of nature, which is karma. And now let's go back to the purport. Now we'll finish it up. And this is now that we know all this, we can deep dive in, and then Prabhupada will give us the lesson of why do we care about all this. At this point in our investigation, we may consider the following question. On the one hand, we realize that our perceptions and activities are conditioned by arrangements of material nature, yet we also ordinarily feel and say, "I am perceiving, I'm doing." Therefore, we can say that our material senses of perception and action are moving because we're identifying the self with the material body, and that the superior principle of super self is guiding and supplying us according to our desire. By taking advantage of the guidance of super self in the form of intelligence, we can either continue to study and put into practice our conclusion that I am not this body, or we can choose to remain in the false material identification. So now it's up to you. I'm sorry, now you know what's going on. And so you got to make a choice after you know. Where was I? I keep losing myself. The last part. Fancying ourselves to be possessors and doers. And so now we understand why it's a misconception to think I'm a possessor, I'm a doer. And like when we say that, sometimes we're like, okay, what does that mean though? I feel like I'm doing this, you know? This is how we understand it, because there's a lot more going on in that action. There's a whole pipeline. If there's a PM in here, they know the user flow diagram. And so like that's what's going on over here. You're having a user flow. You start with desire, then there's the order carrier who takes that desire, fulfills it, and then you have the actual matter moving. And then there's an if condition. There's a condition there. You have qualification for this desire, and then only it passes through to the gate. And so this is when you unpack it, this is what's happening inside. Our freedom consists in orienting our desire either toward the ignorant material misconception or the true spiritual conception. And this is where our power is. We have power in desire. And that's why, as Vaisheshika Prabhu says, where attention goes, energy flows. Why is that? This is the science behind it, because all we have is our desire. And also Krishna says, Dhyayato vishayan pumsam sangasteshu pajayate, where it's all about your desire. It's all about what you intend to do. It's about your purpose. And that's how you actually control your life and use your free will. And you can use it either for good or for bad. We can easily attain to the true spiritual conception by recognizing the super self, Paramatma, to be our friend and guide, and by dovetailing our intelligence with the superior intelligence of Paramatma. The super self and the individual self are both spirit, and therefore the super self and the individual self are both qualitatively one and distinct from matter. And this is one way to describe it. I found this really, we usually talk about, the drop in the ocean. There's that analogy where there's the whole ocean and there's a drop of it. They both are the same quality. They both are seawater, but quantity is different. Another interesting one is Akhand Prabhu, who's a researcher of consciousness in the UK. He's like E equals to MC squared, for example, equation. There's two different parts of the equation. They're different, but they're also equal. And so in the same way, we can also understand super self and the soul. But the super self and the individual self cannot be on an equal level because the super self gives direction or supplies intelligence, and the individual self follows the direction, and thus actions are performed properly. The individual is completely dependent on the direction of the super self because in every step, the individual self follows the direction of the super self in the matter of seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, willing, etc. Do we not feel that, kind of? Where we have, again, this guiding intelligence that is allowing us to continue. We feel that. Not always, but sometimes we do. Especially if we carefully think about it, then we really feel it. Because then you realize, I actually have no power. I have no intelligence even. Because it's all being supplied from somewhere. Because then my remembrance is not even, how do I control remembrance? I can't do that. You can try your best with all these, diagrams and flashcards and whatnot, but you can't control it. And so it's clearly like your entire mind is really being supplied by the super soul's energy. So far as common sense is concerned, again, common sense, very high standard in the 1960s, I think, in the 70s. But as far as common sense is concerned, we come to the conclusion that there are three identities, namely matter, spirit, and super spirit. Look at that. We've found three potencies of God. There's the inferior energy, the marginal energy, and then the superior energy. Now, if we go to the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedic intelligence, there you go, that's the Vedic intelligence personified in literary form, we can further understand that all three identities, namely matter, individual spirit, and the super spirit, are all dependent on the Supreme Personality of God. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The question can be asked, okay, so God is my order carrier? That's kind of nice. That's what God is. He's just going to fulfill my desires, and he just does my thing, whatever I want. He's completely impartial. He doesn't care what I have to say. And so the Prabhupada makes a distinction here. All three of these things are actually dependent on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which is Krishna. And they're features of his personality. There's the impersonal feature, and then there's the Paramatma feature, which is the super soul. And then above that is the Bhagavan feature. The super self is a partial representation or plenary portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Bhagavad Gita affirms that the Supreme Personality of Godhead dominates all over the material world by his partial representation only. So in the material world, this is run by his partial representations to different Vishnus. It starts by Karanadakshaya Vishnu, Mahavishnu, who creates the universes, and then Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, who is maintaining each of the universes, creates them through the agency of Brahma. And then there's Paramatma, who is within every soul, and he maintains those universes also as Kshirodakshaya Vishnu on his milk ocean in the universe. God is great, and he cannot be simply an order supplier of the individual selves. He's just not an order supplier. He's more than that. Therefore, the super self cannot be a full representation of the Supreme Self. So now this is where the yogic process of realizing Paramatma kind of falls apart, because you're realizing only a partial representation. And why is it partial? Because that's his job. He's only doing this job here, but he's more than that. God is great, as Srila Prabhupada says here. Therefore, the super self cannot be a full representation of the Supreme Self, Purushottama, the absolute personality of Godhead. Purushottama is a nice word that Prabhupada, he doesn't usually use names of Krishna in purports. And so this is really interesting, because Purushottama means the greatest person. God is great. And so it's important to remember that in this. Realization of the super self by the individual self is the beginning of self-realization. Again, this is second canto. So Sukadeva Goswami was asked by Parikshit Maharaj, how do I start? How do I get this process started? First is, you got to understand that there is a God. That's what I tried doing last time when I was up here. Where God is the creator. That's how you understand that there is God. And then once he's the creator, then he's the creator of conscious beings. And so he must have consciousness, and he is unlimited. He can create all things. And so then now you have a unlimitedly powerful, omnipotent, omniscient supercomputer that also has personality. Sounds like God. That's what we have. And after that, now how do you realize yourself? This is how you realize yourself, through the Paramatma. Realization of the super self by the individual self is the beginning of self-realization. And by the progress of such self-realization, one is able to realize the supreme personality of Godhead by intelligence, by the help of authorized scriptures, and principally by the grace of the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita is a preliminary conception of the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, and Srimad Bhagavatam is a future explanation of the science of Godhead. So if we stick to our determination and pray for the mercy of the director of intelligence sitting within the same bodily tree, like a bird sitting within another bird, as explained in the Upanishads, certainly the purport of the revealed information in the Vedas becomes clear to our vision. And there is no difficulty in realizing the supreme personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. The intelligent man, therefore, okay, Vasudeva, also another interesting word. Vasudeva, one is the son of Vasudeva, but then I thought, like, okay, but before Vasudeva existed, why was he called Vasudeva, you know? Why is there an expansion called Vasudeva? Like, was Vasudeva always there? Maybe. But another meaning of the word Vasudeva is someone who's everywhere. Vasa means to reside, and Vasudeva is one who resides everywhere. Another important word for Paramatma. It's interesting what names Prabhupada uses. The intelligent man, therefore, after many births of such use of intelligence, surrenders himself at the lotus feet of Vasudeva, as confirmed by the Bhagavad Gita 7:19. And there we go. Now we know what to do. We know what we can do. We can only control our desires, and now let's control them, or let's orient them in the right way. Let's go back to our slides, please, Mataji. And so let's reestablish this link. Krishna shows this impartiality, of course, but he doesn't show it without warning. As Srila Prabhupada said here, Vedic intelligence is the Bhagavad Gita. And so he gave us instructions with lots of warnings of what to desire. And he tells us that our desire has a lot of power. Whatever you desire at the end of your life is where you're going to go. As Ruta Karma Prabhu puts it, it's discrete evolution. It's not continuous. Every life you have a choice. You can go up, you can go down. And then during your life, you have continuous mental evolution. You can change your consciousness continuously. And so he tells us in the Bhagavad Gita to surrender unto him and to reject all this. And that super soul is the link between the subtle body, the false self, and the gross body, the senses, the perception of action, and so on. And the soul identifies with the subtle body, the subtle material body, the mind, intelligence, and ego, and thinks that this false mind is him or her. But the soul can choose to change that and think that with the spiritual mind, as I was saying before, change what mind you think with, that he's inherently a part of Krishna and that he is the spirit soul. And so our freedom consists, again, in orienting our desire either toward the ignorant, material misconception, or the true spiritual conception. And then after that, the really nice thing to say is perform the experiment now. Now you know what to do. If you feel like, okay, well, how do you know this is the right way to do it? You know, why do I follow this? I can do anything. I can orient my desire in whatever way I feel is right. And we say, yeah, someone might say this is also unscientific. But what we say is, based on our observations, we can clearly conclude this through our own experiences. And we've kind of brought up rebuttals for a lot of main points. And if you want to now orient your desire correctly and transcend from this material world, you got to follow the experiment properly. If you're a true scientist, what are you going to do? You're going to do an experiment, it fails, or you're going to just say, the experiment sucks. No, you're going to say, I did the experiment wrong. What did I do wrong? Let me look at it again. And so everything is tested for reproducibility. And so we welcome anyone. If someone wants to test it out, we're like, yeah, come in, let's do it. Let's test it out. But you got to test it out right. You got to chant the Maha Mantra, and then you can't just chant it and just say, it didn't work. Where's love of God? Where's my spiritual body? What happened? It didn't work. I did it once. It didn't happen. Well, if you're a true scientist, you got to follow the protocol. The protocol is one must follow the regulative principles. All right, that we can do. One must chant without offenses. That's hard. That takes practice. But you got to get there if you want to really test it out. And then Mahaprabhu himself guarantees that one will achieve pure love at the end of this. But one must follow the procedure exactly. And so Krishna consciousness clearly we can see is a science. It's not a science in the sense of empirical evidence, as I mentioned at the beginning, but it's science in the most literary sense. Science has a very interesting etymology. In fact, it's to distinguish. What it's distinguishing was stool coming out of the body. And so that's where the profane word comes out, where it's related to science. And then science comes from that root. And it's to distinguish. To have this knowledge where you can distinguish between different things. And so we distinguish here between matter and spirit. And so this is a process of sadhana bhakti, just practice. And then above that comes raganuga bhakti, where through the chanting of the holy name, one is able to actually achieve love as well, and a relationship, a personal, loving relationship with Krishna. And so our goals over here is to rationalize Krishna consciousness. Recently we were on a call with some of the youth. We're on a call with Hridayananda Maharaj, who's very active in finding ways to preach Krishna consciousness in a very attractive and easy to understand way. And what he mentioned was really interesting. We asked him about flying mountains. How do we explain that? And he said, first, you got to show that you're a rational person. That you don't start with the flying mountain. You show that you're a rational person. And it's the same thing in like school. The reason you accept random quantum theories or whatnot in school or all kinds of things is because you believe your professor's pretty rational and he has some authority and so on. And so our goal here is to be the brahmanas of modern society. In Mahaprabhu's time, this was being a sannyasi, but now it's doing a PhD. It's to become educated and intelligent where people see you as a rational person. And when you go through this kind of rational thought process, then you can bring in bhakti. Then you can bring in loving devotional service, because that's kind of hard at the beginning. But our goal is to convince everyone that this is rational. We're rational human beings. We're having a good time. And we want to rationalize Krishna consciousness for you as well. Hare Krishna. We can take any questions right now, if anyone has. We have a couple more minutes, I think. Or any reflections as well. Yes.
Hare Krishna. So for the example with Shukla, she remembered her previous life, and I was wondering, is that her material mind or her spiritual mind that carries through?
I'm not totally sure. So in the material body, when we transmigrate between bodies, our subtle body actually continues with us. So there's a part of our material body that stays with us, and so it could be impressions from that. Of course, the soul has impressions through lifetimes, through its entire process, because it's experiencing it for real. It's not just like a random thing that needs to be unlocked to experience. It's actually experiencing everything you go through. And so I'm sure it's a mixture of both, where those impressions are lasting, and for some, through their qualification, they have some more of that in their body, or in their self. Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. I just have a reflection just to add to your slide when you present it again, future. One is the matter and energy connection, where in physical science it's already demonstrated, like the atomic energy, you say E equal to mc square, so it's already connected, matter and energy connected. And then the last part I would add is like based on the science, the philosophy of science. Science is actually organized common sense. So anyone who we call a scientist, they are just following common sense in a rigorous way. They cannot just like randomly say something. They have to demonstrate it. They have to prove it. Either they do experiments and demonstrate, or they have to show by observation where they cannot do experiments. So basically, science is organized common sense. That's what Prabhupada used in 1960s. So it's basically a progressive one. It never goes old.
Exactly. No, that's completely correct. And science is great for understanding physical matter, when you bring in consciousness, you need to introduce philosophy. And that's kind of the hard part right now, where you're trying to get scientists to think about philosophy, and they're like, I don't want to think about philosophy. I want to think about matter. But you have to if you want to consider everything that's happening. We'll take one final one, if there are two. Okay. Mataji and then Prabhu. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah. Hare Krishna. Very nice lecture, Prabhu. So I have one question. Recently I was reading about Dhruva Maharaj, and Dhruva Maharaj is one of the great devotees of the Lord. And so Dhruva Maharaj meditated on the Vishnu form, that is Paramatma form, four-handed. This question was from last 2-3 days, and today you mentioned, so I got the platform where I can ask question. So how Dhruva Maharaj is different from yogis? So Dhruva Maharaj is a devotee, and how yogis who meditate on Paramatma form, how both are different?
That's an interesting question. Honestly, I haven't really studied that. I'm not totally sure. Of course, the Paramatma is a partial representation of the Supreme Lord. And so when we do realize Paramatma, it's not going to waste, of course, and Lord Vishnu is satisfied with that. And then you can travel to the spiritual world by realization of Paramatma. There is a place for you there. It's not what we go for something higher. And so I think in the same way, it's not unreasonable to think that Vishnu would appear for someone who meditates on him, because he is the Paramatma, and that's his representation. And so that's how I would think about it. In terms of what the difference is, I think it depends on the type of yoga you do as well. One thing that's key with Dhruva Maharaj is that he learned his yoga from a pure devotee, Narad Muni, and he wasn't teaching him Patanjali or anything like that. He was teaching him, bhakti yoga. And so that there's a distinction also over there. It depends on what process of yoga you're doing.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
And Prabhu, last one.
Thank you, Prabhu, for a wonderful talk. I have a question about the relationship with demigods in the universe. I heard everything is personified.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, what control do they really have? Is it they have a set of buttons that they think?
Kind of. It's like they don't have buttons, but they have qualification to have powers, and they have a job, they have a duty to do, and that job is to whatever they're Indra takes care of rain, so on. And when they deviate, the Lord comes down and fixes it. Once there was no Indra, the Lord came down as Yagya and became the Indra of the world, of the universe. And so whenever there is a gap where there is no one qualified enough to become Indra, the Lord will come and do it himself. And so there's always going to be someone who has the right qualifications in those roles doing that. And that's what they're doing. They're also jivas. They have desires and wills, but they also have a job. You go to your job, you do your job. But they also have their own things that they do on the side that is not related to their job.
Because it seems like everything just goes in a pattern,
Mm-hmm.
all the processes. So what do they exactly do? They initiate those patterns?
They're basically suppliers. So the way the demigods work is that you do sacrifice here, and that sacrifice pleases the demigods, and in return the demigods offer rain, grains, whatnot. And so that is the process, that is the transaction. It's like a bank. You go to the bank and they do your thing, and that's it. So it is a pattern, of course, and that they're just order suppliers of the Lord's creation and the order that he has created in this specific world. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you all. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Braj Bhavan Prabhu. Braj Bhavan Prabhu ki. On the auspicious Saturday morning of the month of Kartik, we're very blessed to here. First, Brajas Bhavana, who has grown so wonderfully, and it's giving me so much joy to see him, speak so eloquently and such deep philosophy and convince us from a very scientific standpoint that Krishna is a person and he does exist. It's actually a very important topic, the origins topic, and he's been studying it for many years, I think. I've heard him speak on it many times. So thank you, Brajas Bhavan, for sharing your realizations on this. It's very, very nourishing for us, for our generation, and also for the younger generation, because this is a very constant topic that comes to our mind, and as we deal with material energy and people who deal with material energy, right? So now we'll go on to the next presentation, which is by a Kaishara youth. Arna is going to talk about a witch who turned into a mother. So this is from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and I'll let her start.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. My name is...
Can speak a little louder.
Okay. Hare Krishna. My name is Arna, and I'm 12 years old. Today I will be presenting on Chapter 5, A Witch Who Turned into a Mother. Introduction. This story is about the Rakshasi Putana who came to Goloka to kill baby Krishna. She transformed into a beautiful lady, and everyone let her breastfeed Krishna, not knowing she had evil intentions. Krishna's mercy is unparalleled. In the Garg Samhita it is mentioned that Putana in her past life was Ratnamala, the daughter of King Bali. When Vamandev came to King Bali to ask for 3 steps, Ratnamala had a desire to have a son like him, to breastfeed and be happy. When King Bali was defeated, Ratnamala had a desire to kill him. But still, Vamandev remembered her desire and let her feed Krishna in her next life. Krishna's mercy is unparalleled because even though Ratnamala wanted to kill Vamandev, he still remembered the pure part of her desire. Selfish intention, the path to one's downfall. Prophecy which scared Kamsa. When Kamsa heard the prophecy that the 8th child of Devaki would kill him, he could not think of anything other than how to protect himself. He sent Putana to kill Krishna. As a result, he sent demons after demons, which one of them were Putana, to kill baby Krishna. And at the end, he was killed by Krishna himself. Looks are deceptive. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his book Chaitanya Shikshamrita has compared the demons Krishna has killed with the anarthas, and Putana is compared to pseudo-gurus. Just like how Putana disguised herself as a beautiful lady, the fake gurus also disguise themselves with a lot of paraphernalia to intimidate innocent new spiritual seekers. Putana came to Goloka disguised as a beautiful lady and made everyone gaze at her as she walked past them on the way to Krishna's house. When she arrived, everyone thought she was goddess Lakshmi from Vaikuntha herself. Ego overpowering inner voice. We all have Krishna and Kamsa residing in our lives. If we are not associating with Krishna and his devotees, we are associating with Kamsa, which will always boost our ego. When Putana saw baby Krishna, she knew he was not an ordinary child and that he had a divine nature around him. But Putana's ego was so puffed up by Kamsa's praise that she was an expert in killing small children. She ignored that inner voice and took baby Krishna, which led to the cause of her death. The more we do sadhana, the more our ego gets lowered down. Krishna's causeless mercy. Krishna is always looking for an opportunity to purify us. Even though Putana came in with the intention to kill baby Krishna, Krishna gave her the highest position by coming into her arms and letting her feed him. This explains how sometimes our bhakti is contaminated by some desire we want, but still Krishna accepts us and purifies us. Just imagine, if Krishna can purify Putna, who is envious of him, how much mercy he has towards his devotees who serve him with love. Putna purified. God's mercy is beyond human logic. At the end, Krishna gave Putna a position as a second mother by sucking her poisoned milk. Putna attained position in Vaikuntha. Afterwards, Putna attained a position as a nurse in Vaikuntha Loka, Dhatri Uchitam, as described by Uddhava in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10. Conclusion. In this chapter, we learned that Krishna is merciful to all his devotees. We also learned about ego and how sometimes our ego gets puffed up, and we need to subdue that ego by doing sadhana. Thank you.
Thank you, Arna. That was wonderful meditation on how the pastime of Putna is very relevant and what we can learn from that. Any questions, comments, or reflections on this? Yes, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, that was very nice. So, you said things that I didn't know of. Thank you. So, did Putna get misguided from the birth that where she wanted to nurse children to the one, she was following Kansa's orders? What happened between the two?
Putna and Kamsa?
No. So basically you were showing one slide where Putna wanted, for the Vamana, she wanted to nurse the babies.
Yeah.
So that was a positive and a very, devotional phase. And then she turned out to be following Kansa's order to kill Krishna, right? These are two, same soul, but different bodies and minds. So what happened between the two? What was the triggering thing that she turned what she became?
I can take that answer because there's more to that story.
Okay.
So in the Vamandev pastime, when she saw Vamandev for the first time, she had motherly feelings, and she had, because the Lord was in a baby, like almost like a 5-year-old, and very very handsome, very beautiful child. So she had that instant desire. But when he took 3 steps of land, and actually in that disguise, he took away everything from her father, she had that negative feeling that if there was such a child, I would feed him poison. So both her desires came in that lifetime, one after the other. And that desire manifested as her being born as Putana, where simultaneously both her desires were fulfilled. That's the mystic potency of the Lord. Here, come.
Hare Krishna.
Any other questions, reflections? But that was a fantastic question and observation, Mataji. Yes, Prabhuji.
I'm just connecting this talk with Prabhu's talk before, which means she not only had that desire, but she had that qualification from his talk to have that desires fulfilled.
Yes, excellent. Even I thought of the same connection. And he was just talking about intention and desire and how it works with material energy. That's a very good point. Thank you so much, Prabhu, for sharing that. Any other questions or reflections? So Arna, one question for you, which I think Vaisheshika Maharaj always asks, is what was the part of the story that you learned that was new to you? What feelings did you go through?
The part I learned was like when like Putana had the desire that when she was Ratnamala to like feed baby Krishna, but then like she had the desire to kill Vamandev, and then that made me feel like I learned something new in the story.
And what was that feeling like? Wow, Krishna is amazing, or I should be careful about my desires? What kind of thoughts or realizations, if you can share?
Like I felt like we shouldn't sometimes our ego, we should like be careful about like our ego and make sure like we do like sadhana so our ego doesn't like get so puffed up.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It's a lesson. Yes. It's on.
Hey Krishna, really good presentation, and it was interesting because you mentioned that Putana attained liberation as Daitri, and you said something like even Putana attained Daitri. So how should we compare ourselves with Putana? Like, are we better than Putana because she actively tried to kill God, or although at least for me, yeah, I believe in Krishna and all that, but I really don't know whether my true intention is whether I'm using him as my wishing well, or do I really like love Krishna? How do we know that? Where do you, this is just a thought that happened. Where do we put ourselves in comparison with Putana, or should we even be comparing?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Okay, so I can try to answer that. Well, we are all parts and parcels of Krishna, whether demon, devotee, right, in between. We are all parts of Krishna, and he loves us, irrespective of who we are. And actually in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, this is exactly the question of partiality that is asked by Parikshit Maharaj. And he asks Shukadev Goswami that, is the Lord partial to the Devatas? Because looks like, with all the episodes that happened, he killed Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyaksha, and, he was on the side of the demigod. So is it better to be on a Devata? Is he partial? And there's the whole 7th canto, the whole Prahlad Maharaj pastime was an answer to that question, to say actually the Lord is not partial to anyone because he's self-satisfied. So it's not that whether we are better than Putana or not. In Krishna's eyes, we are all equal. But his mercy is what is exceptional for everyone. And the comparison is made just as an observation that if he could be so merciful to someone who wanted to give him poison, what to speak of someone who is willingly, just lovingly trying to even offer a lamp, right? So it's an encouragement. The intention behind that comparison is encouraging us to serve him with love and not to succumb to those feelings which is there in everyone's heart. Sometimes we are pulled down by our negative feelings and not to succumb to that. So that should answer your question.
Thank you, Mataji.
You're welcome. Okay. With that, we will stop here. Thank you so much, Arna. That was an excellent effort that you put. And Arna's actually just joined Kaishara class. So it's been a very short time, I would say in August. So we can see how you have brought out a lot of important points and your realizations about how much we have to be strict in our sadhana, right? To cover our, to capture our effects of our false ego. So that's excellent to hear. And thank you to Devi Kumari Mataji, who is her mother and her father, of course. Devi Kumari Mataji is our Kaishara teacher this year also. So thank you for the whole family for supporting us in this endeavor to educate children and help them in their spiritual life and bring us more such presentations. Thank you, Arna, once again. We would like to now request to put your mats away so we get prepared for Guru Puja.
Thank you.
This one is better than before. Only it looks it is better, but not in function, and it costed 3 or 4 times more than the previous one. The reception is very good.
Guru Puja paad rahi hai. Mataji, please. Undana nak seri. Appuram Prabhupada inchi odi peruvaru. Chance kedikumbodhu paadu.
Chadiya Vaishnava Seva Nishtara Payeche Keba. Chadiya Vaishnava Seva Nishtara Payeche Keba. Namashrestam Manumapi Shachiputram Atra Svarupam Rupam Tasyagrajam Urupurim Maturim Goshtavatim Radha Kundam Girivaram Mahoradhika Madhavasham Prapto Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi He Guru Jnanadadina Bandho Swanandadata Karuneka Sindho Vrindavana Sinahitavatara Prasida Radha Pranaya Prachara He Dinabandho Karuneka Sindho Guru Prasadam Maimandamure Laksha Parade Bahupapagade Tadpada Padme Stumatischa Krishna Yadyapi Amara Guru Chaitanya Das Tadhapi Janiye Ami Tahara Prakash Guru Krishna Rupe Hoy Shastrira Pramane Guru Rupe Krishna Kripa Karina Bhaktagane Shiksha Guru Keta Jani Krishna Rasvarup Antaryami Bhakta Shrishta Eduiru Naivopayantya Pachitim Kavayasthavesha Brahma Yushapi Kritam Riddhamuda Smaranta Yontar Bahisthanubratam Ashubham Vidunvan Acharya Chaitra Vapusha Swagatim Vyanati. Without serving the representative of Krishna, nobody can approach Krishna. I bow down to the beautiful lotus feet of my spiritual master, by whose causeless mercy I've obtained the supreme holy name, the divine mantra, the service of the son of Shachimata, the association of Srila Swarup Damodar, Rupa Goswami, and his older brother Sanatan Goswami, the supreme abode of Mathura, the blissful abode of Vrindavan, the divine Radha Kunda and Govardhan Hill, and the desire within my heart for the loving service of Sri Radhika and Madhava in Vrindavan. O spiritual master, O giver of divine wisdom, O friend of the fallen, you are the giver of your own bliss, and you are the only ocean of mercy. Although dwelling in Vrindavan, you have descended for the welfare of fallen souls like myself, and you are preaching the divine love of Radha for Krishna. Please be kind upon me. O friend of the lowly, O Guru Deva, you are the only ocean of mercy. I am a dull fool and have committed hundreds of thousands of offenses. I have fallen into a dense myriad of sins. Therefore, grace me with your mercy, so that my mind may be fixed on your lotus feet and on Sri Krishna. Although I know that my spiritual master is a servitor of Sri Chaitanya, I know him also as a plenary manifestation of the Lord. According to the deliberate opinion of all revealed scriptures, the spiritual master is non-different from Krishna. Lord Krishna, in the form of the spiritual master, delivers his devotees. One should know the instructing spiritual master to be the personality of Krishna. Lord Krishna manifests himself as the Supersoul and as the greatest devotee of the Lord. O my Lord, transcendental poets and experts in spiritual science could not fully express their indebtedness to you, even if they were endowed with the prolonged lifetime of Brahma. For you appear in two features, externally as the Acharya and internally as the Supersoul, to deliver the embodied living being by directing him how to come to you. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. Our only wish is to have our consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens our darkened eyes and fills our hearts with transcendental knowledge. He is our Lord birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor, and the Lord and master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the three worlds. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadna Krishna prapti hoy jaha hoy te. Guru mukha padma vakya chite te koriya agya. चरण रति ऐसे उत्तम गति श्री गुरु चरण रति ऐसे उत्तम गति जय प्रसाद पूरे सर्व आशा जय प्रसाद पूरे सर्व आशा चकुदान दिलो जय जन्म जन्म प्रभु से चकुदान दिलो जय जन्म जन्म प्रभु से Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare And now we will sing Damodarashtakam. And we can all be seated. Namamishwaram Sachidanandarupam Rasatkundalam Gokule Prajanam. Yashoda Bhiyolukaladhavamanam Paramishtamatan Padurudyagopa.
Rudantam Muhurnidrayugmam Rijantam Karam Bhoja Yugamena Shatankanidram. bhakti-badam.
Didriksvalila-dhirananda-kunde Sagosham nimajrantam akyapayantam Adishitagneshu bhakta-jitatva Puna prema-tarstam satariti-vandam
Varam deva moksham na mokshavadim va Nachanyam vrineham varishadapiha Idam teva purnatha gopala balam Sada me manasya virastam kimanyay
Idam te mukham bhajamatyantanilayam Vitam kuntale snitha ratasya gopam Mushchumbitam bimbaratadharane Manasya virastama lam lakshavade
Namo Deva Damodarananta Vishnu Prasida Prabhu Dukhatanadhimagnam Kripa Drishti Vrishyati Dinam Vatanu Grihani Shamamagnya Vidyakshi Drishya
Viratmajo Vadamadevayadva Vayamochito Bhakti Bhajo Kritaja Katha prema bhaktim swakame prayacha Namokshi graho nesti damodariha
Nama स्वस्तिस्तु धाम्ने स्फुरदीप्तिधाम्ने त्वदीयो दाराय यथा विश्वस्य धाम्ने नमो राधिकायै त्वदीयप्रियाय नमो नन्तलीलाय देवाय तुभ्यम् नमो राधिकायै त्वदीयप्रियाय नमो राधिकायै त्वदीयप्रियाय नमो राधिकायै त्वदीयप्रियाय नमो नन्तलीलाय देवाय तुभ्यम्
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Gaur Premanande. Sharira Vidya Jodendriya Tahika Jive Deve Vishaya Sagore Dharmati Jivayati Obama Sudurmati Taki Jita Katina Samsare Krishna Bharagorama Kori Bari Jivaja Sakrasadana Vilabha Seyana Mittapa Radha Krishna Gunagam Premera Ko Shri Chaitanya Nita Premera Ko Shri Chaitanya Nita Mahaprasad Govinde Nama Brahmane Vaishnave Sakha Punyavatam Rajan Vishwasana Vajayate Prasadi Sarvadikana Anirasya Vajayate Prasanna Chita Soyasu Buddhi Paryavatishya Tvayopavutta Shaganda Vasamanta Vijoshita Chista Bhojino Dasas Tavamayam Jayamai Shushkam Karishatam Vapi Nitam Vadurideshata Prakti Makina Bhaktavam Natrakala Vijaram Nanishaniya Masrasta Nakalaniya Mastata Praktamanamritam Shishte Bhaktavyam Harirabhavi Bhagavad Shima Prasad Ki Jai Gaur Premanande. Please come take prasadam.